Hello everybody, I'm Redix and welcome to Pro Clips. You catch us at a good time because today's the start of our 5 good budget/free games to play series, which will also be partnered by our 5 budget/free games not to play series, meaning that we play these games and filter out the bad ones like you don't have to do. So keep watching us, and if you like the content, please like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our future videos, because this is just part 1. So let's get to it. So the first game in the list you should check out is The Laundry, a super cheap budget suspense game. To be clear, it isn't going to win any awards for creative story, mainly because there isn't one. It isn't going to keep you playing for hours on end because of its replayability or lengthy campaign, mainly because there isn't one. And it isn't going to make your brain implode with overly complex puzzles, or even basic ones for that matter, because, you guessed it, there aren't any. What it will do though is give you peak anxiety for an hour, with its creepy score and relentless antagonist chasing you around the claustrophobic halls within the game's universe. The premise is really simple and totally without originality. You can collect the 10 notes around the map while being chased by a psychopath with a penchant for clown clothing. If you're thinking it sounds a bit like Slenderman minus the clowns, then you'd be correct in thinking so. He gets too close to you and you die, and you have to start from the beginning. We've seen it before. The closer he gets, the louder his manic laugh gets, and honestly it is terrifying though. Really simple yet blood-curdling shenanigans. To give you an idea what I mean by it being tense, here's a quick look at some footage.
Oh god, he's there. He's there. He's just coming towards me with his pitchfork.
Please don't ask what happens when you collect all 10 notes though, as I'm far too much of a pussy to know. With my best run of about 6 being about all I could handle before the palpitations reached near heart attack level and I had to turn off. If this was a $10 or $20 game, I'd be telling you to stay well clear, but for the price, I mean, it's practically free. It's worth getting just to experience the terror of being chased by Pennywise's more evil cousin. A genuinely scary game which has you feeling this horrible sense of foreboding throughout your playtime. Likely not one you'll play for that long though, and short of collecting notes and escaping your pursuer, there isn't really much else to do. So overall, I give it a 6 out of 10, worth buying because of the super cheap price and scary, albeit limited content. Second on the list is a really unusual one named Brukel, one I can almost guarantee you haven't seen the likes of before. Developed by a guy who, inspired by stories from his grandmother, uses her recollected accounts of her time at Brukel, which is like a Scandinavian farmhouse, to drive the game. What's more is that he actually uses her real voice and stories to narrate the game, with English subtitles.
Yeah, that's me, climbing over barbed wire. I'm really not supposed to be here, but I just couldn't stay away. You see that house there in the distance, that old farmhouse? They call it Brukel. It's where my grandmother grew up.
To call it a true horror game would probably be disingenuous of me. It's more eerie and suspenseful than actually scary in the true sense. However, there are enough horror elements which, along with its originality, mean it deserves a place on the list in my opinion. It's a simple enough game, gameplay wise, acting more of a walking simulator with light puzzles. You arrive at Brukel to see the house your grandmother told you about and break in, I guess. He kind of just, nobody else is there and he just makes his way over the barbed wire fence. So we'll call it his temporary burglar. However, that's what he does. From there you'll start to take pictures of things in the house with the narration of the item and things related from the grandmother. As you progress, day turns into night and things become more suspenseful. The narration becomes increasingly interesting and gives you an insight into the lives lived by those who lived them. There's a good creepy atmosphere, but I do think things could have been sped up somewhat to increase the pacing in the game. There are times when I'd be looking around thinking I've missed something, when the story would progress randomly, giving the impression that it was timed to me on at a certain time, rather than anything I'd not been doing. In which case, those times could have been cut in half without detracting from the game or the atmosphere. As mentioned, there's some fairly light puzzles, and even a couple of decisions to make which can make you fail the game. I say that with inverted commas because in reality it just sends you back 30 seconds before having the chance to change your action or your decision. Brukel took me less than an hour to complete, and that was just about right for me. At its current price, discounted to around 39 pence or around 50 cents, I'd have no problem recommending it to just about everybody, such is the uniqueness of the game. At its original price of $3.99 or probably around $5, I'd probably be on the fence. There is some replayability in that I only did half the achievements in my first playthrough. I did do a second playthrough, but that was just for the recording. If it had just been for myself, perhaps I wouldn't have done a second playthrough. Maybe I would, it's hard to tell. But for me personally, it was probably too slow paced to have any inclination, certainly to do 3 or 4 playthroughs. With that said though, I'm glad I played it and will probably remember Brukel for longer than I will most other games in the genre. So for that alone, I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10. So I'd say it's worth playing once for sure, maybe more if you're into this type of stuff, and maybe more for people who don't mind a slow paced game. It is super original though. Third on the list is Immure Part 1. Immure is a free to play game, but honestly don't let that put you off. It's quite a little hidden gem. The only catch being that Part 2, which is really just the second half of the full game, isn't free to play. That said, even then the second part is really cheap at less than £3 or maybe around about $4. I haven't played Part 2 though, so the second part isn't included in this mini review. I wasn't sure what to make of Immure when I first loaded it up. It's a side-scrolling dungeon crawler of types with a really cool 2D art style. You play as Will, a dude who seems to have somehow got himself trapped in an old mansion type, which may or may not be some part of a dream world. I don't say that to be mysterious or to avoid spoilers, since even after completing Part 1, I still have no idea really. It maintains its mystique throughout this part. What starts off appearing pretty simple in execution actually starts to show some depth as you progress. There are lots of different floors and rooms that often intersect one another, with many doors unlocked until you later find the keys to unlock them, meaning there's a large chunk of the game where you'll be backtracking to places you've been previously. Don't worry though, it never gets boring or tedious. There are 2 reasons for that. One, it doesn't do it for long enough ever to get to the eye-rolling stage where you stumble across yet another locked door. It's done just the right amount. And secondly, you have things patrolling the corridors which will chase you if you get too close. These, let's just call them enemies to avoid spoilers, will kill you if they catch you. You do have some weapons to fight back, but as of yet I've pretty much just run and hid when confronted by them, mainly because they scared the shit out of me, but partly also because the controls are a little clunky. Not to spoil the game clunky, but clunky enough I'd rather just run than mess around trying to fight back. What I did really like is how the tension is built by the enemy footsteps. The closer you are to them, the louder they get. Which brings this horrible sense of foreboding as they approach. As you progress, you'll encounter the odd NPC who will usually help or guide you in some way. These can come from people out in the game world or in the safe rooms you can find to be safe from attack and save your progress, etc, etc. Speaking of saving your progress, I do wish it did auto-save a little bit more. It's not Dark Souls level of harsh when you die, but it does often mean you'll have lost some inventory and it can be a little bit tedious going through finding some item again, usually a few levels below or above when you have a psychotic enemy blocking the path. That said, I know some people enjoy the challenge and I'll put this down as more of a personal preference. Part 1 isn't long enough to truly build any emotional connection to the protagonist and friends, but the story is strong enough that I did care enough about it to want to see it through, and was a little bit disappointed when it in the to be continued screen. So overall I give it a 6.5 out of 10. I'd say it's got a very intriguing plot with more depth than it first appears. People will dig the unusual art style too, I think. Coming in at number 4, we have Frostbite Deadly Climate. Now this, guys, is my favourite game on this list, and I'm not really sure why. Are the graphics great? No. Average at best. Is the premise fresh and original? No, it's a complete rip-off of John Carpenter's The Thing, if we're being totally honest. Does it at least handle well with good game and weapon play? Not really. Again, I'd say that's average at best. I think the thing to say about this, guys, is it's much better than the sum of its parts. I think that even though it does copy the aforementioned to a T, doesn't make it a bad thing, since, let's be honest, the thing is great. Also, the pacing is done really well here. Not only do you have to manage your health, stamina and inventory, but you also have to keep checks on your temperature, which will drop at a rate dependent on the temperature of your surroundings. For example, a closed room will afford you more time than being stood outside in the cold. If your temperature bar runs out, then your health will start to deplete until you die. As you explore the base, you'll come across many items and need to decide what to pick up and what to leave behind, and also what to keep on your person and leave in your storage cupboard. There are enemies to fight and several weapons to kill them with, and to be honest the variation isn't great though. You can't just pick one weapon and stick with it unless you run out of ammunition or just want to use the axe, but it's kind of just a mechanic rather than something you really look forward to. As you manage your health, temperature and inventory, you're tasked with some small puzzles to complete to eventually get the power back up and make your escape. Difficulty is balanced really well too, if I'm honest. The game will give you hints and tips but doesn't completely hold your hand, meaning you'll have to actually read the notes you pick up to get an idea of where to go and passwords for when you get there. If you aren't a fan of going back through pages and pages of notes, don't fret too much. These notes are typically shorter than they are sometimes in these games and get to the point so it really overwhelms. Again, though, alternative, if you don't like the idea and can't be bothered with the puzzles, etc., then please do feel free to click the link above where we have done a full quick walkthrough of this game. It's another short game, but it is completely free to play, which is amazing. It will probably take about an hour or so to complete on your first run, but I enjoyed it enough to play it through 2 or 3 times so far as of writing this. So overall I'd give this a 7.5 out of 10. Excellently paced survival horror for absolutely free. Well worth playing with that considered. So on to the final one. Lastly we have The Ghost Train, a Japanese horror game made by Chiller's Heart, which if you're into Japanese horror games means you've probably heard of them. If not, they're an indie development group who have made several of these types of games. In the game you relive what might as well be the same day over and over, catching the same train every night, presumably after work. You'll speak to people who seem to be only partially aware of your presence and kind of dreamlike state. You'll fall asleep randomly and wake up with new people around you who have just apparently appeared from nowhere. It almost feels like playing a dream, playing the Ghost Train, and I was just waiting to look down and realise I'd forgotten to put my trousers on to confirm I was indeed dreaming. As you repeat the steps of getting on the train, progressing the story bit and then getting on the train again the next day to repeat, you have periods of solving some puzzles. There aren't many, but the ones are there that can be really tricky, but nothing a chat with Google can't fix of course. Truth be told, this isn't a game that carries a lot of depth to it. The puzzles aren't overly enjoyable and the writing translated from Japanese isn't amazing. Every appeal this game has to me is within the aesthetic and the atmosphere. It has this splendid, shiny, pristine feel to it, some great artworks on the train's advertising boards, and the character models have this weird 2D photorealism blended onto like a 3D model, which gives them a look of almost appearing real but just being off enough to be creepy. The train lights up magnificently as you traverse it, often changing look and appeal several times throughout, which is impressive considering the source material is a simple train carriage. As with some others on this list, which will vary a bit more in future instalments to be honest, this is more an experience than a fleshed out game. You'll either like these creepy walking sims or you don't. If you do, then I think you'll definitely find something to take from this. If you aren't a fan, then you might give up as soon as you come across the first puzzle. Personally, it's a 6 out of 10 from us. Creepy with an awesome aesthetic, let down by being a bit slow and one-dimensional. Okay everybody, that brings us to the end of this instalment. Don't forget to subscribe if you like this first part, as we definitely plan on doing many more. I've quite the backlog of games to go through on Steam, and each one will either appear on our games to play videos or on our games not to play videos, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.